Chapter 11, The Interior of a Heart. So there are some important plot developments here, some details that are important to catch, but also, as this title suggests, we are going to do a deep dive into the psyches of Reverend Dimmesdale and Roger Chillingworth. I think it is really interesting how enlightened of a man Nathaniel Hawthorne was. He is really very skilled at sort of understanding psychological tension, unearthing sort of people's motives and reasons for acting out when they do or keeping things quiet when they don't. I mean, there's just a lot of really kind of sophisticated psychological stuff going on here, which kind of makes it even more suspenseful, I would say, at this point. So, as just to remind you that what happened in the previous chapter is at the end of it, Roger Chillingworth pulls back some of Dimmesdale's clothing while he's napping and sees something on his skin that somehow becomes a massive enlightenment for him and a sort of motivates him to sort of continue to torture him psychologically. So it says here, after the incident last described, which would have been when he literally saw something on Dimmesdale's skin, the intellect of Roger Chillingworth had now sufficiently plain path before it. So he no longer feels like there's a mystery around Dimmesdale. He seems to understand what's going on with him, which was not the case before. And so this knowledge gives Chillingworth a quiet depth of malice, hitherto latent but active now in this unfortunate old man, which led him to imagine a more intimate revenge than any mortal had ever wreaked upon an enemy, to make himself the one trusted friend. So he's becoming even more evil with the knowledge that he has. He's going to become pitiless and unforgiving, all that dark treasure to be lavished on the very man to whom nothing else could so adequately pay the debt of vengeance. So his desire for vengeance is even greater with the knowledge that he has. And it's okay that we don't know at this point exactly what it is he saw, but we could start to sort of predict, and we will get some hints here in this chapter and the next one. Meanwhile, the clergyman, which would be Dimmesdale, is sensitive and shy. Roger Chillingworth, however, was inclined to be hardly, if at all, less satisfied with the aspect of affairs, which Providence, using the avenger and his victim for his own purposes, and perchance pardoning, where it seemed most to punish, had substituted for his black devices. A revelation, he could almost say, had been granted to him. So whatever he saw has literally made him acutely aware of what's going on with Dimmesdale. So I just wrote that, he had an aha moment based on whatever it is he saw. By its aid in all the subsequent relations betwixt him and Mr. Dimmesdale, not merely the external presence, but the very innermost soul of the latter seemed to be brought out before his eyes. Chillingworth feels like he really does understand the minister's soul. He became thenceforth not only a spectator, but a chief actor in the poor minister's interior world. And I wrote here, oh no, like he's going to start to use this knowledge against Dimmesdale to impact him psychologically in an even worse way. So realizing that Dimmesdale's already suffering. I mean, he's withering away. He's always sick. And we've already gotten the idea of, just from the conversations that Chillingworth and Dimmesdale have had, that his bodily ailments are coming from his mental anguish and his emotional turmoil. All these things that are going on are impacting his health. Would he arouse him with a throb of agony? The victim was forever on the rack. It needed only to know the spring that controlled the engine, and the physician knew it well. So he's always now playing with him to upset him. Interestingly, all this was accomplished with a subtlety so perfect that the minister, though he was constantly a dim perception of some veiled influence, could never gain a knowledge of its actual nature. So Dimmesdale senses that Chillingworth has some sort of evil, and I just wrote here he senses R sees evil, just because it's hard to write Roger Chillingworth's full name in these small margins, but he can't pin it down. True, he looked doubtfully, fearfully, even at times with horror and the bitterness of hatred at the deformed figure of the old physician. So sometimes Dimmesdale is like looking at him like, oh my God, you are the devil, but he still can't really say for sure. For as it was possible to assign a reason for such distrust and abhorrence, so Mr. Dimmesdale, conscious that the poison of the one morbid spot was infecting his heart's entire substance, attributed all his presentiments to no other cause. He took himself to task for his bad sympathies in reference to Roger Chillingworth, disregarded the lesson that he should have drawn from them. So because he can't actually name what it is about Chillingworth that makes him uncomfortable, he blames himself. He's like, it's me. I'm just so evil. I'm such a sinner that I'm now seeing bad things in other people. So that's unfortunate because he should have been following his gut when it comes to Chillingworth. Maybe asking him to move out would have been a good idea. I'm thinking about that on my own. So he continues to have all this bodily disease. He's still very sick. But what's interesting, and it says down here, his intellectual gifts, his moral perceptions, his power of experiencing and communicating emotion were kept in a state of preternatural activity by the prick and anguish of his daily life. So because he's so unhappy, he is very eloquent in terms of speaking to his congregation. And so it's ironic to me here that the more miserable Dimmesdale gets, the more famous he becomes, not only in Massachusetts Bay Colony, but beyond. Everyone thinks he is the most amazing minister ever. His fame, though still on its upward slope, already overshadowed the soberer reputations of his fellow clergymen, eminent as several of them were. And so I have some little numbers here. There are 3 different kinds of men. And this is the challenge with Nathaniel Hawthorne. These sentences are very long, and so it's hard to get the main idea. So what we're getting in this paragraph is that there are many different kinds of men who are in the church, who are influential, and he belongs to the 3rd type of man. So there are the scholars who are very connected with the divine profession because of their years of work, just because they are senior. That would be the first kind of man. Then there are the men too of a sturdier texture of mind than his, like they're just like tougher guys. They're not maybe so they're not so delicate and sensitive. And they definitely have I would say seniority just because they're sturdy sort of people. They are shrewd, hard iron, or granite understanding, like their understanding of the Bible and of what religious practice ought to look like is very dependable. So they're sort of like, just like the backbone, perhaps, of the church. Then there were others, again, true saintly fathers whose faculties had been elaborated by weary toil among their books and by patient thought, and it goes on and on and on to describe these kind of saintly ministers who toil over the Bible and understanding religion. These fathers, otherwise so apostolic, lacked heaven's last and rarest attestation of their office, the tongue of flame. So they're not like the kind of ministers that are sort of fearing God, that are scaring their congregations. They would have vainly sought to express the highest truth through the humblest medium of familiar words and images. So they don't want to scare people. They don't want to talk in, excessive sort of biblical terms. They want to talk to their congregation in ordinary, everyday language. And this is the kind of man Dimmesdale is. So it says, it was to this latter class of men that Dimmesdale, by many of his traits of character, naturally belongs. So he belongs to the 3rd type of man, the truly saintly fathers who speak in familiar, humble words and images. So I think that I could see that being a quiz question just in general. And this is a lot to try to figure out if you don't have I just sort of underline the main ideas here. To the high mountain peaks of faith and sanctity he would have climbed, had not the tendency been thwarted by the burden of crime or anguish beneath which it was his doom to totter. It kept him down on a level with the lowest of him, him, the man of ethereal attributes, whose voice the angels might else have listened to and answered. So because he sees himself as such a sinner, it keeps him down on the same level as the people in town. But this very burden it was that gave him sympathy so intimate with the sinful brotherhood of mankind, so that his heart vibrated in unison with theirs. He's so empathetic. He lives the same life they live, and received their pain into itself, and sent its own throb of pain through 1,000 other hearts in gushes of sad, persuasive eloquence. So people are drawn to him because they can relate to him. He's speaking their language. He's living their lives. Often is persuasive, but sometimes terrible. The people knew not the power that moved them thus. Like, they don't know what kind of sinner he is, just that he says he is, but they don't know. They deem the young clergyman a miracle of holiness. Okay, so I made a note here. Think about what this says about religion. And what I mean by religion, obviously, I'm thinking primarily first about the Puritan religion. A lot of the Puritan religion during that time was about a fear of God, doing things so that you would get into heaven, working hard, being moral, going to church, often, frequently, every week, more than once, most likely. These were like your tickets to heaven. And what this is saying here is that actually religion is more meaningful when your minister is not putting in the fear of God in you, but is speaking to you as an equal. Sharing your humanity, basically, is what this is saying. So I am picking up sort of an opinion in this of Nathaniel Hawthorne himself, that one of the flaws with the Puritan religion is that it was not personal enough, and that the reason Dimmesdale is so effectual is because he is so personal with his congregants. So, and you could obviously apply this to any religion. I think when people feel drawn to a religion, it's because of the community. In addition to their spiritual life, it's about the people, it's about the person who is leading the church, that you feel some connection, and the people definitely felt that with him. So it is inconceivable the agony with which this public veneration tortured him. So he doesn't like all this praise. He feels like a hypocrite. He wants to say to them, I, whom you behold in these black garments of priesthood, I, who ascend the sacred desk and turn my pale face heavenward, taking upon myself to hold communion in your behalf with the most high eminence, I, in whose daily life you discern the sanctity of Enoch, I, whose footsteps, as you suppose, leave a gleam along my earthly track, whereby the pilgrims that shall come after me may be guided to the regions of the blessed, I, who have laid the hand of baptism upon your children, I, who have breathed the parting prayer over your dying friends, to whom the amen sounded faintly from a world which they had quitted, I, your pastor, whom you so reverence and trust, am utterly a pollution and a lie. Now, he hasn't literally said this. It's what he wishes he could say. More than once, he has gone to the pulpit with the idea of saying something like this. More than once, nay, more than 100 times, he had actually spoken. So maybe not to this degree, but spoken, it says, how? He had told his hearers that he was altogether vile, a viler companion of the vilest, the worst of sinners, an abomination, a thing of unimaginable inequity, and that the only wonders was that they did not see his wretched body shriveled up before their eyes by the burning wrath of the Almighty. Could there be a plainer speech than this? So he has said something along these lines. Would not the people start up in their seats and leave the church? No, not indeed. They see him as a saint on earth. So he can't get out from underneath this saintlyhood. He had spoken the very truth and transformed it into the veriest falsehood. And yet by the constitution of his nature, he loved the truth and loathed the lie, as few men ever did. Therefore, above all things else, he loathed his miserable self. So because he can't seem to get out from underneath this feeling of being a hypocrite, he hates himself even more because he is a moral man. He loves the truth, and no one really knows the truth. So here are we going to get some details about what he's doing. This inward trouble drove him to practices more in accordance with the old corrupted faith of Rome than with the better light of the church in which he had been born and bred. So in the old days in Rome, there were different practices, and he is taking up these practices. In Mr. Dimmesdale's secret closet under lock and key, there was a bloody scourge. So this means a whip. Oftentimes, this Protestant and Puritan divine had plied it on his own shoulders, laughing bitterly at himself all the while and smiting so much the more piteously because of that bitter laugh. So this is called self-flagellation. He is whipping himself. Maybe that's something that was seen by Chillingworth. That would be a logical conclusion. It was his custom, too, to fast. So we saw a reference to this earlier, that he's sometimes not eating, which, of course, would definitely weaken him. The idea was to purify the body and render it the fitter medium for God. But rigorously, he was fasting excessively until his knees trembled beneath him as an act of penance. So to atone for his sins, he's torturing himself. He kept vigils, which means he didn't sleep. Likewise, night after night, sometimes in utter darkness, sometimes with a glimmering lamp, and sometimes viewing his own face in a looking glass by the most powerful light which he could throw upon it. So, I'm thinking about that time he fell asleep at lunchtime, and Roger Chillingworth looked underneath his cloak or his shirt. He was probably so sound asleep because he hadn't slept maybe for many nights prior. So this describes that when he doesn't sleep for days on end, he begins to hallucinate. And he has these crazy visions. And that's what all this is about. Like, he sees his dead friends. He remembers his father and his mother. And there's just like a bunch of memories that come tumbling out. And now through the chamber which these spectral thoughts had made so ghastly glided Hester Prynne, leading along little Pearl in her scarlet garb. So he even sort of hallucinates and thinks about her. None of these visions ever quite deluded him. At any moment, by any effort of his will, he could discern substances through their misty lack of substance and convince himself that they were not solid in their nature. So he never gets swept up in a dangerous way with these hallucinations. He does always have some element of what is real and what is not. But he's kind of in a dangerous place here psychologically. I mean, he's definitely messing with his mind. But for all that, they were in one sense the truest and most substantial things which the poor minister now dealt with. You can't deny these hallucinations. They're part of his everyday. It is the unspeakable misery of a life so false that it steals the pith and substance out of whatever realities there are around us, and which were meant by heaven to be the spirit's joy and nutriment. So these hallucinations are part of being a sinner, is how he sees this. So it says here at the end of this chapter, on one of those ugly nights, which we have faintly hinted at, like this. I wouldn't say faintly. I would say this is a very detailed description. But forborne to picture forth, the minister started from his chair. A new thought had struck him. There might be a moment's peace in it. So he gets an idea of what might bring him some peace. We don't know what it is yet. Attiring himself with as much care as if it had been for public worship, and precisely in the same manner, he stole softly down the staircase, undid the door, and issued forth. So we have here it's almost like a psychological thriller, I swear, and definitely some suspense building up.